You are standing at the threshold of something that cannot be unseen, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech designed to make you feel something. Actually, literally, in the most precise sense of the word. You are standing at the edge of a doorway that, once you step through, will permanently alter the structure of how you perceive reality, how you understand yourself, and how you relate to the field that underlies everything you have ever experienced. There is a book, and this book does not merely describe the quantum field. It does not simply explain the physics. It does something far more precise, far more dangerous, and far more transformative than explanation. It reveals what the quantum field actually does when a conscious observer, when you, finally, genuinely, completely understands what it is, not reads about it, not intellectually processes the concept, understands it in the way that changes the frequency of your nervous system, in the way that collapses old possibilities and crystallizes new ones, in the way that makes the gate between who you were and who you are becoming not just visible but passable. That gate is open right now, and the fact that you found this transmission, the fact that something in you was drawn here to this specific moment, to these specific words, is not coincidence. It is the quantum field itself responding to a shift in your frequency. Something in you has already begun to cross. You may not have named it yet. You may not have understood what the strange feeling of the last few days, or weeks, or months actually was. The sense of standing between two worlds. The sense that something old is ending. The sense that you are on the edge of something vast and clear and irreversible. That is the gate. And today, you learn what's on the other side. We are going to move through this together. We are going to begin where the book begins. Not with equations, not with laboratory data, not with the intellectual scaffolding of quantum mechanics, but with the single most important question that the quantum field poses to every conscious being who encounters it. We are going to build through what the field actually is, not as a metaphor, but as a precise, documented, scientifically grounded reality. We are going to stand at the specific threshold where understanding becomes experience. We are going to cross it, and when we arrive on the other side, nothing about how you engage with your own life will be the same. One version of you is listening to this right now. A different version of you will finish it. Let's begin. There is a question that stops people, not a question that confuses them. Confusion is manageable. Confusion is just a temporary state of not yet knowing. This is a question that stops them in a more fundamental way. It stops the machinery of ordinary thinking. It stops the automatic processing that runs most of human consciousness most of the time. It stops the narrative, the story, the ongoing internal monologue that most people mistake for themselves. The question is this: what is the quantum field? Not what does it do in a laboratory, not what mathematical formalism describes it. What is it in the most direct, most honest, most unmediated sense? What is the stuff that the universe is made of before it becomes the things we see? Most people, when they encounter quantum mechanics, do one of two things. They either retreat into pure abstraction, they let it remain a collection of equations and laboratory results that are interesting in a distant, academic way, but have nothing to do with their actual lives. Or they go in the opposite direction, and they grab onto the most dramatic-sounding implications. The observer effect, the entanglement, the non-locality. And they use these concepts loosely, metaphorically, in ways that feel exciting, but lack the precision that makes them actually transformative. The book we are exploring today charts a third path. A path that is neither purely abstract nor loosely metaphorical. A path that is precise and direct and grounded in what the physics actually says, and then takes that precision all the way to its logical conclusion, which is a conclusion that most physicists are reluctant to state openly, that most philosophers approach only carefully, and that most spiritual traditions have been pointing toward for millennia without having the language to say it clearly. The conclusion is this: the quantum field is not a thing that exists separately from the consciousness that observes it. It is not a backdrop against which conscious experience occurs. It is not the stage on which the play of awareness unfolds. The quantum field and consciousness are not two separate phenomena that happen to interact in interesting ways. They are, at the most fundamental level of description that physics currently has access to, aspects of a single unified reality. And when you understand this, not intellectually, not as a piece of trivia about physics, but in the way that reorganizes the operating system of your perception, the field responds, measurably, demonstrably, in ways that change the trajectory of what you call your life. This is what the book reveals. This is the secret that the thumbnail is pointing toward. This is what the gate opens onto. But we need to approach it carefully. We need to build the foundation correctly, because the foundation is everything. A misunderstood version of this insight is just another piece of spiritual entertainment. A precisely understood version of it is a crossing point. It is a threshold. It is the gate between the version of you that experiences life as something that happens to you and the version of you that understands at the cellular level that you are happening to life. So let's build the foundation. The quantum field, in the most technically precise language that physics has, is the ground state of reality. It is what exists before particles exist, before matter exists, before the solid, stable, predictable world of classical physics exists. The quantum field is a vast, non-local, interconnected substrate of pure potential. It is not empty. Physicists are very specific about this. The quantum vacuum, the ground state of the field, is not nothing. It is seething with energy. It is vibrating with what are called virtual particles, fluctuations in the field that are constantly arising and subsiding, constantly creating and annihilating, constantly in a state of dynamic, creative flux. This is not metaphor. This is what the equations describe. This is what the experiments confirm. The ground state of reality is not stillness. It is not emptiness. It is a field of infinite potential in constant creative motion. And here is where the first threshold appears. Here is the first gate within the larger gate. Because the question that naturally arises, the question that physicists have been wrestling with since the early 20th century, since the founders of quantum mechanics first looked at their data and realized that something profoundly strange was happening, is this: what causes the field to stop being pure potential and become specific, actual, defined reality? What causes the wave function to collapse? This is the measurement problem. This is the question that has divided physicists into camps for over 100 years. And the answer that the mathematics itself seems to point toward, the answer that several of the most rigorous, most careful, most respected physicists in the history of the field have arrived at after following the logic wherever it leads, is that consciousness is not separate from this process, that the act of observation, the act of measurement, the act of a conscious system engaging with the quantum field is not merely a passive recording of what was already there. It is a participatory act. It is a creative act. It is, in some sense, that the physics itself demands we take seriously, the act by which potential becomes actual. The universe, it turns out, requires witnesses, not metaphorically, structurally. Now, let's be precise here, because precision is everything at a threshold. There is a version of this insight that gets stated sloppily and becomes misleading. The sloppily stated version says, "Your thoughts create reality, so just think positive thoughts and you'll get what you want." This is not what the physics says. This is not what the book reveals. This is a distortion that takes a profound, precise, transformative insight and reduces it to a self-help formula that doesn't work and leaves people frustrated and confused. The precise version is more interesting and more demanding and more transformative. The precise version says this: consciousness and the quantum field are not in a relationship where one controls the other. They are in a relationship where they co-arise, where they mutually determine each other, where the state of your consciousness, not your momentary thoughts, not your wishes, not your intentions stated verbally, but the actual state of your consciousness, the frequency at which your entire nervous system, your entire being, is operating. This is what determines which possibilities in the field become actual for you, not which possibilities exist. The field contains all possibilities, all of them. Every version of every outcome, every reality that could ever be experienced. The field holds all of it simultaneously, in superposition, in that state of pure potential that the equations describe. What your consciousness determines is which of those possibilities collapse into your experience. This is the gate. This is what changes everything. Because if this is true, and the evidence, both scientific and experiential, is overwhelming that it is, then the question of how to change your life is not primarily a question of strategy. It is not primarily a question of effort, or planning, or resource allocation. It is a question of frequency. It is a question of which state of consciousness you are operating from. It is a question of what you are actually being, beneath the level of what you are thinking or doing or saying. And this is where the book becomes a crossing point rather than just an interesting read. Because the book does not stop at the insight. It goes further. It asks the question that most books in this space never ask, because most books in this space are not actually willing to follow the logic all the way to the threshold. The question is, what actually changes in the field when a human being genuinely understands this, not believes it, not hopes it's true, not intellectually accepts the proposition, understands it, in the way that the understanding itself becomes a new state of being, in the way that the knowing reorganizes the structure of perception, in the way that you cannot go back to seeing the world the way you saw it before, because the old seeing has been permanently replaced by something clearer and more real. What changes in the field when that happens? This is the secret revealed. This is what we are crossing toward. If this transmission is finding you at the right moment, take a second to like this video and subscribe. More of this work is coming, and you will want to be here for it. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Marcus was a physicist, a real one. Not the kind who appears on television to explain things in simplified terms, but the kind who spent years in graduate school developing an intimate relationship with the mathematics of quantum mechanics, who wrote papers that other physicists read and cited, who understood the formalism at a level of depth that most people never approach. And Marcus had a problem that his physics could not solve. The problem was not intellectual. The problem was that Marcus understood quantum mechanics completely, and it had not changed his life at all. He understood superposition. He understood entanglement. He understood the measurement problem. He understood the various interpretations: Copenhagen, many worlds, pilot wave, relational. And he had opinions about which was most mathematically elegant and which was most philosophically coherent. and his life was exactly the same as it had been before he understood any of it. He was still operating from the same fears, the same patterns, the same reflexive responses to the same kinds of situations, the same sense that his life was something that happened to him, something he was navigating as best he could, something he was trying to optimize and manage and survive. The quantum field, as Marcus understood it, was something that happened at scales so small that it had no practical relevance to the macroscopic world where human beings actually lived. This is the position, by the way, that most physicists take. And it is, in a certain technical sense, defensible. The quantum effects that are so dramatic at the subatomic scale do tend to average out at the macroscopic scale. The decoherence of quantum states in warm, wet biological systems happens very rapidly. The argument that quantum mechanics is relevant to consciousness and to lived human experience is an argument that many serious physicists resist strongly. Marcus resisted it too, until the day he encountered a particular piece of research that he could not explain away. The research was not from the fringes. It was not from the self-help world, or the New Age world, or the world of consciousness studies that serious physicists tend to dismiss. It was from the laboratories of major research institutions. It was published in peer-reviewed journals. It had been replicated, and what it showed was something that Marcus's understanding of quantum mechanics could not account for. It showed that human intention, specifically the sustained, coherent, focused intention of a trained human consciousness, produced measurable, statistically significant effects on quantum random number generators, on physical systems operating at the quantum level. Effects that should not have been possible if consciousness were simply a byproduct of classical physical processes, a passive observer of a reality that was already fully determined before it was observed. Marcus spent 3 months trying to find the methodological flaw. He could not find it. He spent another 3 months trying to find a classical explanation, some mechanism by which the effect could be accounted for without invoking consciousness as a causal factor. He could not find one. And then, one evening, sitting in his office surrounded by papers and printouts and the accumulated evidence of something he could not explain, Marcus crossed a threshold. He crossed it not because he found a new argument, not because he read a new paper, not because someone convinced him of something. He crossed it because he stopped trying to explain the evidence away and simply looked at it. He let it be what it was. He let the data speak without immediately constructing a defense against what it was saying. And in that moment of allowing, in that moment of dropping the resistance that had been his intellectual identity for his entire professional life, something shifted. Not in his understanding, in his experience, in the actual felt quality of his relationship with reality. The field, Marcus later said, felt closer. That was the only word he could find for it. Not warmer, not friendlier, not more magical. Closer, as though the distance he had always experienced between himself and the world, the sense of being a separate observer looking out at a reality that was fundamentally other, had collapsed, as though the wall he had been looking through had become transparent. He did not immediately know what to do with this. He did not immediately have a practice or a framework or a set of techniques. He had an experience, a direct, unmediated, undeniable experience of what the quantum field actually is when you stop holding it at arm's length and let it be what the mathematics has always been telling you it is. Sorts. A field of potential that is not separate from you. A field of potential that is, in some fundamental sense, made of the same stuff as you. A field of potential that responds, not to your wishes, not to your thoughts, not to your words, but to the actual state of your being. Marcus's life did not change overnight. The gate does not work that way. Crossing a threshold is not the same as arriving at a destination. It is the beginning of a journey on the other side. But Marcus's life did change, in ways that were measurable and undeniable, and that his colleagues, who knew him well, could not fail to notice. The research he produced after that evening had a quality it had not had before, a quality of directness, of precision, of willingness to follow the logic wherever it led without flinching. His relationships changed, his health changed, his relationship to his own work changed from something he was doing to something he was being. He had crossed, and there was no going back. Think about your own life for a moment. Has there been a crossing point for you? A moment when you knew something had shifted permanently? When you stood at the edge of something and chose to step through? Drop it in the comments. The field receives what you bring there. We are going to return to Marcus later. But first, we need to go deeper into the physics. Because the physics is not decoration here. The physics is the gate. The physics is the precise mechanism by which what we are describing is not just possible but inevitable. Let's talk about superposition. Superposition is the quantum state in which a particle, or more precisely, in which any quantum system, exists in multiple states simultaneously, not sequentially, not one after another, simultaneously. At the same time, the famous example is Schrödinger's cat, which exists in a superposition of alive and dead until the box is opened and the system is observed. But the cat is a thought experiment designed to make the strangeness of superposition visible at the macroscopic scale. The actual phenomenon operates at every scale, in every quantum system, which is to say, in every physical system at its most fundamental level. A quantum system in superposition is not in an unknown state. This is a critical distinction, and it is the distinction that most popular treatments of quantum mechanics get wrong. It is not that the particle is in one definite state, and we simply don't know which one. It is that the particle is genuinely, actually, in multiple states at once. The uncertainty is not in our knowledge. It is in the nature of the system itself. The wave function, the mathematical object that describes a quantum system, does not describe a probability distribution over possible definite states. It describes an actual superposition of actual states, all of them real, all of them present, all of them part of the actual condition of the system. And then something happens, and the superposition collapses, and one state becomes actual. One outcome is realized. One possibility becomes the reality. What causes this? What is the mechanism? This is the question that the measurement problem is asking, and the answer that the mathematics itself seems to demand, the answer that the most rigorous interpretation of the formalism points toward, is that the collapse is associated with interaction with a macroscopic system, with a measuring apparatus, with, at the end of the chain, a conscious observer. John von Neumann, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century, followed this chain of reasoning in the 1930s and arrived at a conclusion that made him profoundly uncomfortable. That the chain of physical causation in quantum mechanics terminates in consciousness. That there is no way to complete the description of a quantum measurement without invoking a conscious observer at the end of the chain. Eugene Wigner, another towering figure in the history of physics, took this seriously enough to write about it explicitly. He argued that consciousness must be assigned a different ontological status than physical systems, that it cannot be fully described within the quantum formalism, because it is, in some sense, the thing that the formalism is describing the world for. These are not fringe figures. These are not spiritual teachers or New Age philosophers. These are among the most rigorous, most respected, most mathematically sophisticated physicists in the history of the discipline. And they arrived at the conclusion that consciousness is not a byproduct of the physical world, but a fundamental feature of it. This is the foundation of the gate. This is the physics of the threshold. Now, let's go further. Because understanding that consciousness is fundamental to the quantum field is the beginning. It is the approach to the gate. The gate itself, the crossing point, is what happens when you understand what this means for how you exist in the world. The quantum field contains all possibilities. We have established this. Every possible state of every possible system exists in superposition in the field. Every version of every outcome. Every reality that could be experienced. All of it is there, in the field, right now, in a state of pure potential. Your consciousness, at every moment, is interacting with this field. Not occasionally, not when you are meditating or being particularly intentional. Constantly. continuously. At every moment of your existence, the state of your consciousness is participating in the process by which possibilities in the field collapse into actualities in your experience. This is not a metaphor for influence. This is not a poetic way of saying that your attitude affects your outcomes. This is a description of a physical process, a process that is happening right now as you listen to this, as your nervous system processes these words, as the state of your being, whatever it actually is beneath the surface of your thinking, is interacting with the quantum field and participating in the determination of what becomes real. The question that the book asks, the question that this transmission is built around, is: what is the actual state of your consciousness right now? Not what you think it is, not what you would like it to be, not what you tell yourself it is when you are being optimistic about your own growth and development. What is it actually? What is the actual frequency at which your entire being is operating? What is the actual signal you are sending into the field? Because the field does not respond to your preferences. It does not respond to your intentions as you state them verbally. It does not respond to your vision board, or your affirmations, or your carefully constructed narrative about who you are becoming. It responds to what you actually are, to the actual state of your consciousness, to the actual frequency of your being. And most people, and this is the uncomfortable truth that the book does not flinch from, most people are operating from a state that is not aligned with what they say they want. Not because they are lying, not because they are failing to try hard enough, but because the state of their consciousness is shaped by something much deeper and much older than their current intentions. It is shaped by the accumulated patterns of their nervous system, by the beliefs that were installed before they were old enough to evaluate them, by the emotional signatures that were laid down in early experience and have been running in the background ever since. This is the gap. This is the space between where most people are and where the gate is. The gap between the state of consciousness they are actually operating from and the state of consciousness that would be in frequency alignment with the reality they are trying to create. And here is the crucial thing. Here is the thing that the book reveals that most treatments of this material do not say clearly enough. You cannot close this gap by trying harder. You cannot close this gap by being more disciplined, more focused, more intentional. You cannot close this gap by learning more information about quantum mechanics, or consciousness, or manifestation, or any of the other concepts that populate this space. You can only close this gap by crossing a threshold, by undergoing a state change, by moving from one level of consciousness to another, in the way that quantum systems move from one state to another, not gradually, not incrementally, not through a smooth, continuous transition, but through a collapse, through a sudden, discontinuous shift from one reality to another. This is the quantum gate. This is the crossing point. This is what the book is ultimately about. And this is where we need to talk about frequency. Not as a metaphor, as precisely as we can. In quantum mechanics, every system has a characteristic energy. And energy and frequency are related by one of the most fundamental equations in physics, Planck's relation, which says that energy equals the Planck constant times frequency. Every quantum state has a frequency. Every transition between states involves a change in frequency. The system absorbs or emits a photon, a quantum of light, whose frequency corresponds exactly to the energy difference between the two states. This is not metaphor. This is not a loose analogy. This is the mechanism by which quantum state transitions occur in physical systems. Now, the claim that the book makes, the claim that the physics supports, the claim that the evidence from consciousness research supports, the claim that the experiential evidence of every human being who has undergone a genuine threshold experience supports, is that consciousness operates according to analogous principles. That consciousness has states. That these states have characteristic frequencies. That transitions between states are not gradual, but discontinuous, and that the frequency of a given state of consciousness determines which possibilities in the quantum field it is in resonance with, which possibilities it can collapse into actuality. This is the mechanism of the gate. This is the physics of the crossing. When you are operating from a state of consciousness characterized by fear, by the deep background, often unconscious sense that the world is fundamentally unsafe, that resources are scarce, that you are in some fundamental way not enough, you are operating at a frequency, and that frequency is in resonance with a particular set of possibilities in the quantum field. The field responds by collapsing those possibilities into your experience. Not because the universe is punishing you, not because your fear is attracting bad things, but because the field is simply responding to the actual state of your consciousness, the way a radio receiver responds to the actual frequency of the signal it is tuned to. When you are operating from a state of consciousness characterized by what we might call coherence, by a genuine, embodied, cellular level sense of wholeness, of connection, of the fundamental okayness of existence, you are operating at a different frequency. And that frequency is in resonance with a different set of possibilities in the quantum field. The field responds by collapsing those possibilities into your experience. The gate between these two states is not a gradual slope. It is a threshold. It is a crossing point. It is a discontinuous jump from one state to another, like a quantum system jumping from one energy level to another. And like a quantum system, you cannot be partially on both sides of the gate. You are either in superposition, hovering at the threshold, neither fully in the old state nor fully in the new one, or you have collapsed into one state or the other. The gate is open when your frequency is high enough to match what is on the other side. And the frequency rises not through effort, but through understanding. Not through discipline, but through clarity. Not through doing more, but through becoming more. Through a genuine, irreversible expansion of what you are capable of being. This is what the book reveals. This is the secret. This is why the title says, "What the field does when you finally understand it." Because the understanding itself, the genuine, complete, embodied understanding, is the frequency shift. The understanding is the crossing. The understanding is the gate. Let's go deeper into what this understanding actually consists of. There are 3 levels at which most people engage with the idea that consciousness and the quantum field are fundamentally connected. And only one of these levels is the actual crossing point. The first level is intellectual acceptance. This is where most people who encounter this material end up. They read the books, they watch the videos, they listen to the transmissions, and they come away saying, "Yes, I understand that. I believe that consciousness is connected to the quantum field. I believe that my state of being affects what I experience. I understand the theory." And then they go back to their lives, and nothing changes. Because intellectual acceptance is not a frequency shift. It is not a threshold crossing. It is the equivalent of reading a description of a doorway without walking through it. The description is accurate. The doorway is real. But you are still on the same side. The second level is emotional resonance. This is where people go when they have an experience, in a meditation, in a moment of profound beauty or grief or connection, in a moment when something in their life breaks open in a way that cracks the shell of their ordinary perception, and they feel the truth of this. They feel in their body, in their nervous system, in the actual lived texture of their experience, that the boundary between themselves and the world is not as solid as they thought, that there is something vast and alive and responsive on the other side of the wall they have been looking through. This is closer. This is the approach to the gate. This is standing at the threshold and feeling the warmth of what is on the other side. But it is still not the crossing, because emotional resonance without the next level tends to fade. The experience passes. The ordinary perception reasserts itself. The wall becomes solid again, and the person is left with a memory of having been close to something without having crossed into it. The third level is what the book calls embodied knowing. This is the level at which the understanding has reorganized the actual operating system of your consciousness, not just your beliefs about reality, not just your emotional relationship to the idea, but the actual structure of how you process experience, how you relate to the moment, how you exist in the field. This is the crossing. This is the gate. This is the state change that the quantum field responds to, not as a reward, not as a validation, not as the universe applauding your spiritual progress, but simply as a physical response to a change in frequency, the way a tuning fork responds to a sound of the same frequency, the way a resonant cavity amplifies the specific wavelength it is built for, the way a quantum system collapses into the state that matches the energy of the photon that strikes it. Embodied knowing is not something you achieve. It is something you cross into. And the crossing requires a specific kind of preparation and a specific kind of release that we are going to move through together now. The preparation is this. You need to understand, with complete clarity, what you are actually operating from right now, not what you aspire to operate from, not what you believe you operate from, what you actually, demonstrably, in the evidence of your life, operate from. The evidence of your life is the most honest mirror you have, not your thoughts about your life, not your narrative about your journey, not your sense of how far you have come or how much you have grown. The actual, concrete, measurable evidence of what your life contains right now. What does your life contain right now? What is the quality of your relationships? Not whether you have the right ideas about relationships, not whether you understand the importance of connection and vulnerability and authentic communication. What is the actual quality of the relationships you are living in right now? What is the quality of your health? Not whether you know what you should be eating, or how you should be moving, or what practices you should be doing. What is the actual state of your body right now? What is the quality of your creative and professional life? Not what you are planning to do, or what you intend to create, or what you know you are capable of. What is actually being created right now? What is the quality of your inner life? Not the quality of your best moments, or your peak experiences, or the times when you felt most alive and connected. What is the quality of the ordinary Tuesday afternoon? What is the texture of the moments between the meaningful ones? This is the evidence. This is the mirror. And the mirror shows you, with perfect accuracy, the frequency you are actually operating from, because the field does not lie. The field does not give you something other than what you are in resonance with. The field simply responds. And if the mirror shows you a life that is less than what you know is possible, less connected, less creative, less alive, less free, less joyful, less expansive than the version of life you can feel existing somewhere just beyond the edge of your current perception, then what the mirror is showing you is the gap. the gap between the frequency you are operating from and the frequency that is in resonance with the life you are capable of living. And the gap is the gate. The gap is not a problem to be solved. It is a threshold to be crossed. This is the reframe that changes everything. This is the moment in the transmission where the approach to the gate becomes the standing at the gate. Because as long as you experience the gap as a problem, as evidence of your failure, as proof of your inadequacy, as the distance you have to somehow cover through effort and discipline and trying harder, you are in a state of consciousness that is fundamentally incompatible with crossing the threshold. You are in a state of consciousness that is in resonance with more gap, with more distance, with more of the same. The moment you experience the gap as a gate, as a doorway, as a threshold, as the precise location of your next evolution, everything shifts. Not because you have changed anything in your external circumstances, not because you have implemented a new strategy or acquired a new skill, but because the frequency of your consciousness has shifted. Because you have moved from the state of problem solving to the state of threshold crossing. And these are not the same state. They are not even close to the same state. They are on opposite sides of a gate. Can you feel the edge? Can you feel where you are right now? Not in your life, not in your circumstances, but in your consciousness? Can you feel the threshold? Can you feel the place where the old way of relating to your life ends and something new becomes possible? This is the gate, and it is open. Where are you standing right now in your own life? Is there a gap you have been treating as a problem that might actually be a gate? Tell me in the comments. Naming it out loud is itself a frequency shift. Now, let's talk about what the field actually does when you cross it. Because this is the part that most treatments of this material get wrong. Most treatments describe what happens after you cross the threshold in terms that sound like magic. Like the universe suddenly starts giving you things. Like doors open and opportunities appear and synchronicities multiply and life becomes a flow of effortless abundance. And some of that is true. Some of that does happen. But it is not magic. It is physics. And understanding the physics of what happens after the crossing is what makes the crossing stable, what makes it permanent, what makes it a genuine state change rather than a temporary peak experience that fades back into the ordinary. When a quantum system undergoes a state transition, when it absorbs a photon and jumps from a lower energy state to a higher one, several things happen. First, the system is now in a new state. It has new properties. It interacts with the world differently. Not because it decided to, not because it tried to, but because it is now a different system, operating from a different configuration. Second, the system is now in resonance with different things. A hydrogen atom in its ground state absorbs and emits specific wavelengths of light. A hydrogen atom in an excited state absorbs and emits different wavelengths. The same atom, but in a different state, is in resonance with a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Third, the new state is stable, within limits. The system will remain in the excited state until it emits a photon and drops back to a lower state, or until it is excited further to an even higher state. It doesn't spontaneously return to where it was without a reason. These three things, new properties, new resonances, relative stability, are exactly what happens when a human consciousness undergoes a genuine threshold crossing. New properties. When you cross the gate, when the embodied knowing replaces the intellectual acceptance, when the frequency shift is real rather than aspirational, you are a different system. You process information differently. You respond to situations differently. Not because you are trying to behave differently, not because you have committed to a new set of habits, but because the actual structure of your consciousness has changed. You see things you didn't see before. You notice things you didn't notice before. You have access to capacities, creative, intuitive, relational, somatic, that were not available to the previous configuration of your consciousness. New resonances. The quantum field, which contains all possibilities, now presents you with a different set of possibilities. Not because the field has changed. The field contains everything. But because you have changed, you are now in resonance with a different subset of the field's infinite potential. The possibilities that collapse into your experience are different possibilities than the ones that were collapsing before. This is what people describe as synchronicity, as the sense that the right things are appearing at the right time, that the universe is somehow cooperating, that life has a quality of flow and alignment that it didn't have before. It is not magic. It is resonance. It is the field responding to a new frequency. Relative stability. The new state is not permanent in the sense of requiring no maintenance, but it is stable in the sense that it does not spontaneously revert. You do not simply wake up one morning and find yourself back in the old state, the old frequency, the old relationship to the field. The crossing was real. The state change was real. The new configuration of your consciousness is the new baseline. And from this new baseline, further crossings become possible. Further gates appear. Further thresholds become visible. Further evolution becomes available. This is the arc that the book describes. Not a single crossing that solves everything. Not a one-time event that transforms your life completely and permanently in a single moment, but a series of thresholds, each one building on the last, each one opening a new gate, each one revealing a new level of what is possible when consciousness and the quantum field are in genuine, embodied, coherent alignment. If you can feel yourself standing at this gate right now, between the frequency you have been broadcasting and the one you are actually capable of sustaining, there is a guide written for exactly this moment. The sealed timeline maps the complete threshold crossing with the precision of a quantum phase transition, walking you through all 5 phases, from diagnosis through collapse, through the crossing itself to sealed coherence. You'll find it in the description below. Let's talk about the specific practices that the book offers for crossing the gate. Because understanding is the beginning. Understanding is the approach, but the crossing itself requires something beyond understanding. It requires a specific kind of engagement with your own consciousness that is more direct, more physical, more immediate than intellectual comprehension. The first practice is what the book calls field coherence. This is the practice of establishing in your nervous system a state of genuine coherence, not relaxation, not the absence of stress, not a pleasant meditative state, but the specific physiological state in which the various systems of your body are operating in synchrony, in which your heart rhythm, your brain waves, your breath, your hormonal and nervous system activity are all aligned and mutually reinforcing. This state is measurable. It has a specific physiological signature. And it is not the same as the ordinary relaxed state that most people associate with meditation. It is something more active, more alive, more electric than relaxation. It is the state in which your consciousness is most coherent, in which the signal you are sending into the quantum field is most clear, most focused, most precise. The practice of field coherence begins with breath, not controlled breathing in the sense of forcing a particular pattern, but the kind of breathing that allows the body to find its own natural rhythm, the rhythm that is most coherent for your particular system at this particular moment. This is usually a slower, deeper breath than the one you are using right now. It is a breath that reaches into the belly, that expands the chest, that engages the diaphragm fully. And it has a quality of completeness, of each breath being fully breathed, of each exhale being fully released. As you establish this breath, something in your nervous system begins to settle, not into passivity, into coherence. The scattered, fragmented, multidirectional activity of the ordinary mind begins to organize itself, not because you are forcing it to, but because the breath is signaling to the entire system that it is safe to cohere, that it does not need to remain in the fragmented, defensive, stress response mode that is the default state for most human nervous systems in the modern world. From this place of coherence, the second practice becomes possible. The book calls this field attention. This is the practice of directing your attention, not your thoughts, not your intentions, but your actual, embodied, felt attention toward the quantum field itself, toward the ground state of reality, toward the vast, alive, responsive potential that underlies everything you can see and touch and measure. This sounds abstract. It is not. The quantum field is not somewhere else. It is not in a laboratory or in a physics textbook or in some rarefied spiritual dimension, accessible only to the enlightened. It is here. It is the ground of this moment. It is what this moment is arising from, what it is made of, what it is. The practice of field attention is simply the practice of letting your awareness rest in the ground rather than in the figures, of letting your attention settle into the space from which things arise rather than being captured by the things themselves. In ordinary consciousness, attention is captured by objects, by thoughts, by sensations, by perceptions, by the ongoing narrative of self and world. This is not wrong. This is the appropriate mode of consciousness for navigating the practical demands of life. But it is not the mode of consciousness that is in direct contact with the quantum field. It is the mode of consciousness that is in contact with the already collapsed, already actualized, already determined surface of reality. The practice of field attention is the practice of going deeper, of letting the attention move beneath the surface of the already determined into the ground of pure potential, of making contact, not conceptually, not imaginatively, but actually, directly, in the way that your skin makes contact with the air, with the quantum field itself. When this contact is made, something happens. Something that is difficult to describe in language, because language is a tool designed for the surface of reality, for the already collapsed, already determined world of objects and events and narratives. But let's try. When your attention makes genuine contact with the quantum field, when the coherence of your nervous system is sufficient, and the depth of your attention is sufficient, there is a quality of aliveness that becomes palpable. Not a sensation exactly, not an emotion exactly, something more fundamental than either. A quality of presence that is both utterly still and utterly dynamic at the same time. The stillness of pure potential. The dynamism of infinite possibility, both at once. This is the field. This is what you are in contact with when the practices work. And the contact itself, the actual, direct, embodied contact with the ground state of reality, is what produces the frequency shift, is what constitutes the crossing, is what the quantum field responds to by presenting you with a different set of collapsed possibilities. The third practice is what the book calls state installation. This is the practice of, from the place of field coherence and field attention, deliberately inhabiting the state of consciousness that corresponds to the life you are moving toward. Not imagining it, not visualizing it, not thinking about it, inhabiting it. This is the distinction that most treatments of this material miss. Visualization is a surface activity. It is a mental activity. It engages the imagination, the cognitive faculties, the narrative constructing mind, and it produces a mental representation of a desired state, which is not the same as the actual state. State installation is different. It is the practice of actually, somatically, in your nervous system, in your body, in the felt quality of your moment-to-moment experience, inhabiting the state that corresponds to the life you are moving toward. Of feeling, not imagining, feeling, what it is to be the version of you who has already crossed the gate, who is already operating from the new frequency, who is already in resonance with the new set of possibilities. This is not pretending. This is not self-deception. This is the deliberate use of the nervous system's capacity to generate states, a capacity that the nervous system uses constantly, automatically, in response to memories, to anticipations, to narratives, to environmental cues. The practice of state installation is the practice of using this capacity deliberately, of choosing the state rather than being chosen by it. And when this is done from a place of genuine field coherence and genuine field attention, when it is not a surface mental activity, but a deep somatic reality, the quantum field responds, because the field is responding to the actual state of your consciousness. And the actual state of your consciousness, when state installation is practiced correctly, is the state of having already crossed, of being already on the other side of the gate. This is the physics of the practice. This is why it works. Not because you are tricking the universe, not because you are bypassing some cosmic rule that says you have to earn what you want, but because the field responds to frequency, and the frequency of a consciousness that is genuinely, somatically, in its actual nervous system, inhabiting the state of having crossed. That frequency is different from the frequency of a consciousness that is wishing it could cross, hoping it will cross, trying to cross. The field cannot tell the difference between a state that is happening in your life and a state that is happening in your consciousness with the full coherence and depth of genuine inhabitation. This is not a bug. This is the feature. This is the mechanism. This is the gate. Let's return to Marcus. After that evening in his office, after the crossing that happened not through a new argument, but through the simple act of allowing the evidence to be what it was, Marcus began to work with the practices. Not because he had read about them. He hadn't. He developed them independently, guided by his understanding of the physics and by the direct feedback of his own experience. He began with coherence. He was a physicist. He understood what coherence meant in physical systems. He understood that coherence in a signal meant that the signal was organized, that its components were in phase with each other, that the information it carried was clear rather than scrambled. He applied this understanding to his own nervous system. He began to notice the difference between the scattered, fragmented, defensive state that had been his default and the coherent state that became accessible through specific practices of breath and attention. He noticed something immediately. The coherent state felt different, not better in the way that relaxation feels better than stress. Different in a more fundamental way. It felt like being more real. Like the ordinary scattered state was a kind of static, a kind of noise, and the coherent state was the signal beneath the noise. Like he had spent his entire life listening to a radio station through heavy interference and had suddenly found a way to clear the channel. From this place of coherence, he began to practice what he called quantum attention. He would direct his attention, not his thoughts, not his analytical mind, but his actual felt, embodied attention, toward the field itself. He would let his awareness rest in the space between thoughts, in the ground from which his perceptions arose, in the vast, quiet, alive potential that he now knew from his physics was the actual ground state of reality. And he noticed something that he could not explain in terms of his previous understanding. The field was not passive. It was not inert. It was responsive. When his attention was scattered and fragmented, the field felt distant, like something he could only access through the mediation of equations and experiments. When his attention was coherent and direct, the field felt immediate, present, alive, as though it were meeting his attention with its own kind of attention. He knew this sounded mystical. He was a physicist. He was deeply uncomfortable with anything that sounded mystical. But he was also a scientist, and the evidence of his own direct experience was data. He could not dismiss it simply because it made him uncomfortable. He began to track the correlation between his state of consciousness and the quality of his work. He kept notes. He was a scientist. He documented everything. And what he found was a correlation so strong that it could not be attributed to chance. On the days when he began his work from a state of genuine field coherence, when he had done the practices, when his nervous system was genuinely coherent rather than scattered, when his attention was in genuine contact with the ground state rather than spinning on the surface, his work had a quality that it did not have on the days when he began from the ordinary scattered state. Not just quantity, not just productivity, quality. The insights were more direct. The connections were more surprising and more correct. The writing was cleaner. The thinking was sharper. The problems that had been resisting solution for weeks would suddenly resolve, not through effortful analysis, but through a kind of direct perception that felt more like receiving than like figuring out. He began to understand what the book would later describe. that the quantum field, when a consciousness is in genuine, coherent contact with it, does not simply present more of the same possibilities. It presents possibilities that were not accessible before. Not because they were not there before. All possibilities are always there, in the field, in superposition. But because the frequency of his consciousness in the coherent state was in resonance with a different subset of the field's infinite potential. He was collapsing different possibilities into actuality, not through effort, through frequency. This is the secret. This is what the book reveals. This is what the thumbnail is pointing toward. The secret is not a technique. The secret is not a formula. The secret is not a set of beliefs to adopt or a set of behaviors to implement. The secret is a state, a specific, precise, physically describable state of consciousness that puts you in genuine resonance with the quantum field at a frequency that collapses the possibilities you are capable of living into your actual experience. And the path to that state is not effort. It is understanding, complete, embodied, irreversible understanding of what you actually are in relation to what the field actually is. You are not a separate observer looking out at a reality that is fundamentally other. You are a conscious system that is made of the same stuff as the field, arising from the field, in constant participatory relationship with the field, collapsing possibilities from the field into experience at every moment. You are not in the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself from a particular location. You are the field becoming conscious of itself through the instrument of your particular nervous system. When you understand this, not intellectually, but in the way that changes the frequency of your being, the field responds. Not because it is rewarding you, not because you have finally done something right, but because the frequency of your consciousness has shifted, and the field, which responds to frequency, is simply responding to what you now are. This is the crossing. This is the gate. This is the secret revealed. Now, let's talk about what changes on the other side. Because the other side is not a place, it is a state. And the state has specific, describable, concrete characteristics that are different from the characteristics of the state you were in before the crossing. The first thing that changes is your relationship to uncertainty. Before the crossing, uncertainty is threatening. It is the space between what you know and what you need to know, between where you are and where you want to be, between the current reality and the desired reality. It is the gap that needs to be closed, the problem that needs to be solved, the discomfort that needs to be managed. After the crossing, uncertainty is the field. It is the superposition. It is the space of pure potential in which all possibilities exist simultaneously. It is not threatening. It is generative. It is the ground from which new realities emerge. Your relationship to uncertainty shifts from fear to curiosity, from avoidance to engagement, from the desperate need to know what will happen to a genuine comfort with not knowing, because not knowing means the possibilities are still open, still in superposition, still available to be shaped by the frequency of your consciousness. This is not a small change. This is a fundamental reorganization of how your nervous system relates to the future. And because most of the suffering that human beings experience is related to uncertainty, to the fear of what might happen, to the anxiety of not knowing, to the desperate grasping after certainty in a universe that is fundamentally uncertain. This reorganization changes the quality of your experience in a way that is pervasive and profound and immediate. The second thing that changes is your relationship to time. Before the crossing, time is primarily experienced as a sequence of problems to be solved. The past is a collection of things that went wrong or could have gone better. The future is a collection of things that might go wrong or need to be managed. The present is the narrow, pressured space between a past that was imperfect and a future that is uncertain. This is the time structure of a consciousness that is operating from the scattered, defensive, fear-based frequency. After the crossing, time is experienced differently. The past is not a collection of failures. It is the precise, inevitable path that led you to this threshold. Every difficulty, every disappointment, every moment that seemed to be a setback was a preparation. Was the quantum field, through the mechanism of your experience, building the exact configuration of consciousness that was needed to make this crossing possible? You could not have crossed this gate without having walked the path that brought you here. The path was not a mistake. The path was the preparation. The future is not a collection of threats to be managed. It is a field of possibilities that are in resonance with your current frequency. And since your frequency has shifted, the possibilities in resonance have shifted. The future is not fixed. It is not determined. It is open, genuinely, physically, quantum mechanically open, in ways that it was not open before. Because you have changed, the field that responds to you has changed. The possibilities that will collapse into your experience are different possibilities than the ones that were collapsing before. And the present becomes the gate itself. The present moment is the only place where the collapse happens, the only place where possibility becomes actuality, the only place where the quantum field intersects with conscious experience. The present is not the narrow, pressured space between past and future. The present is the entire field. The present is where everything happens, where everything is happening, where everything will happen. The present is the gate, and the gate is always open, and you are always standing in it. This is the relationship to time that the other side of the gate makes possible. And it is not a philosophical position. It is a lived experience. It is the actual texture of how time feels when your consciousness is in genuine, coherent contact with the quantum field. The third thing that changes is your relationship to other people. Before the crossing, other people are primarily experienced as separate, as entities with their own agendas, their own needs, their own realities, which may or may not be compatible with yours. Relationships are primarily navigated from a place of separateness, of managing the interface between your separate reality and their separate reality, of trying to get your needs met while also meeting theirs, of the constant negotiation that separateness requires. After the crossing, the separateness does not disappear. You are still a distinct individual. You still have your own perspective, your own experience, your own location in the field. But the separateness is no longer the primary reality. The primary reality is the field, the quantum field that underlies and connects all conscious beings, the ground state from which all individual consciousnesses arise, the unified substrate that makes the phenomenon of connection not just possible but fundamental. When you are in genuine, coherent contact with the field, you are in contact with this unified substrate. And from this contact, your relationship to other people shifts, not into a kind of undifferentiated merger where the boundaries dissolve, but into a quality of connection that is real rather than performed, that is grounded in the actual shared reality of the field, rather than in the negotiated surface of separate personalities. This changes everything about how relationships feel. It changes what you need from them and what you are able to give to them. It changes what conflicts look like and how they resolve. It changes the quality of the ordinary interactions, the conversations, the silences, the moments of shared attention, in ways that are palpable and immediate. The fourth thing that changes is your relationship to your own creativity. Before the crossing, creativity is experienced as something you do, something you produce through effort and skill and the application of what you know. The creative act is primarily a surface activity, a reorganization of existing elements, a combination of existing ideas, a refinement of existing approaches. After the crossing, creativity is experienced as something you receive, not passively. You are not simply a conduit for something that comes through you without your participation. But the source of the creative impulse is not the surface mind. It is the field. It is the vast, alive, intelligent potential that underlies everything. And your role in the creative act is not to produce, but to be sufficiently coherent, sufficiently open, sufficiently in contact with the field, that what the field is offering can actually come through. This is why the greatest creative work in science, in art, in every domain of human endeavor, so often has the quality of having been received rather than constructed. Why the creators themselves so often describe the experience as one of listening rather than thinking, of allowing rather than forcing, of being in a state where something beyond their ordinary capacity is flowing through them. This is not mysticism. This is what happens when a consciousness in genuine field coherence opens to the creative potential of the quantum field. The field is not empty. The field is the source of all novelty, all creativity, all genuine innovation. And when you are in resonance with it, you have access to that source. The fifth thing that changes is your relationship to what is possible. Before the crossing, what is possible is defined by what has happened before, by what you have seen work, by what the people around you believe is realistic, by the accumulated evidence of your past experience and the past experience of people like you. The possible is the familiar. The impossible is the unfamiliar. And the range of what you attempt is constrained by the range of what you believe is achievable. After the crossing, what is possible is defined by the field, and the field contains all possibilities, not the possibilities that have been previously realized, not the possibilities that are considered realistic by the consensus of your environment. All possibilities, including the ones that have never been realized before, including the ones that seem impossible from the perspective of the old frequency, including the ones that are not accessible to the version of you that was operating before the crossing. This is what people mean when they describe the experience of life on the other side of a genuine threshold crossing as feeling like a different world, not because the external circumstances have necessarily changed dramatically, but because the range of what is perceived as possible has expanded in a way that is irreversible. You cannot go back to the smaller version of possible once you have genuinely crossed into the larger one. The gate does not swing both ways. Once you have seen what the field actually contains, you cannot unsee it. Once you have been in genuine resonance with the full range of possibility, you cannot return to the constrained range of the old frequency. This is the point of no return. This is the crossing that cannot be uncrossed. This is the gate that once passed closes behind you, not to trap you, but because the old state has collapsed, because the old frequency is no longer the frequency you are operating from, because the old version of you, the one that was standing at the gate, uncertain, hesitant, looking at the threshold with a mixture of longing and fear, that version no longer exists in the way it did before. One version of you entered this transmission. A different version is arriving on the other side. Let's do the crossing now. Let's do the practice. Let's make this real. Find a position that is comfortable and alert, not the position of sleep. The position of arrival, sitting or lying, whatever allows your body to be fully at ease without losing the quality of wakefulness. Let your eyes close or soften their focus. Let the external world recede, not disappear, but recede to the background where it belongs for the next few minutes. Begin with your breath, not a controlled breath, a found breath, the breath that your body wants to take right now, if you let it. Deeper than the breath you were taking before. Slower, more complete. Let each inhale be full. Let each exhale be total. Let the breath move through you rather than you moving the breath. As the breath settles, notice the quality of your awareness. Notice that your awareness is not located in a single point. It is distributed. It is present throughout your body. It is present in the space around your body. It is present in the room, in the air, in the vast, quiet potential that underlies everything you can sense. Let your awareness expand, not forcefully, not by effort, simply by allowing it to be as large as it actually is. Let it include the space between your thoughts. Let it include the silence beneath the sounds. Let it include the stillness beneath the movement. Let it rest in the ground from which everything is arising. This is the field. This is what you are in contact with right now. Not a concept, not a metaphor. The actual ground state of reality. The quantum field itself. The vast, alive, responsive potential from which all things arise and to which all things return. Stay here for a moment. Let this contact be real. Let the aliveness of the field be palpable. Let the responsiveness of the field be felt, not imagined. Felt in your body, in your nervous system, in the actual quality of this moment. Now, from this place of contact, of coherence, of genuine presence in the field, let yourself inhabit the state of having crossed, not the state of wanting to cross, not the state of hoping to cross, the state of having crossed, of being already on the other side of the gate, of being already the version of you that is operating from the new frequency, of being already in genuine, embodied, cellular level resonance with the quantum field. What does this feel like? Not what should it feel like. What does it actually feel like in your body right now, as you let this state be real? Where in your body do you feel it? What is the quality of it? What is different about the texture of this moment compared to the texture of the moments before this practice? Let the state be real. Let it be actual. Let it be not a simulation of what you want to feel, but the actual feeling of what it is to be in genuine resonance with the field, with all of its potential, with all of its responsiveness, with all of its intelligence and creativity and aliveness. Stay here. Let the field meet you. Let the contact be mutual. You are not reaching for something distant. You are settling into something that has always been here. You are coming home to the ground of your own being, which is the ground of all being, which is the quantum field itself. This is the crossing. This is the gate. This is the moment where the old frequency ends and the new frequency begins. And now, from this place, let the awareness of what is possible expand. Not what you have planned, not what you have strategized, not what you have concluded is achievable based on your past experience. What the field holds for a consciousness at this frequency. What becomes possible when you are operating from genuine coherence, genuine contact, genuine resonance with the ground state of reality. Let the possibilities be there. You do not need to name them all. You do not need to see them clearly. You simply need to know, in the way that you know the sun is there, even when it is behind clouds, that the field holds possibilities for you that you have not yet accessed, that the crossing you are making right now is opening you to a range of experience that was not available at the old frequency, that the life on the other side of this gate is not the same life as the life on this side. Stay in this state for as long as it feels alive. Let the field be real. Let the contact be real. Let the crossing be real. When you are ready, let your awareness gently return to the surface, to the room, to your body, to the ordinary texture of this moment. But bring something with you. Bring the knowledge, not the intellectual knowledge, the felt knowledge, the somatic knowledge, that the field is real, that the contact is real, that the crossing is real, that you are not the same version of you that began this transmission. The gate is behind you now. The other side is where you are. What you do with this matters. The crossing is the beginning, not the end. The state change is the opening of a new chapter, not the completion of the story. And the chapter that opens on the other side of the gate requires something specific from you. It requires consistency, not the consistency of discipline, of forcing yourself to maintain a practice through willpower and determination. The consistency of coherence, the practice of returning again and again to the state of genuine field contact, of not allowing the ordinary demands and distractions of life to scatter your consciousness back into the old frequency, of treating the coherent state not as a special experience to be sought on particular occasions, but as the baseline, the ground from which you operate, the frequency from which you engage with everything. This is harder than it sounds. Not because the coherent state is difficult to access. You have just demonstrated that it is accessible, but because the world is very good at pulling you out of it. The world is full of signals that are designed, consciously or unconsciously, to trigger the old frequency. The news, the social media, the the conversations that are steeped in the collective assumption that reality is fixed and determined, and that the range of the possible is narrow, and that fear is the appropriate response to uncertainty. All of these are signals that pull toward the old frequency. And the practice, the real practice, the daily practice, the moment-to-moment practice, is the practice of noticing when you have been pulled out of coherence and returning. Not with judgment, not with self-criticism, not with the sense that you have failed or fallen back. Simply with the recognition that the field is always there, that the gate is always open, that the return is always available, and that the act of returning is itself a crossing, a smaller crossing within the larger crossing, a gate within a gate. This is how the evolution happens, not through a single dramatic transformation that solves everything at once, but through the accumulation of crossings, through the practice of returning again and again to the coherent state, through the gradual, or sometimes sudden, deepening of the frequency, through the progressive expansion of what is possible as each new level of coherence opens a new level of resonance with the field. The book describes this as a spiral rather than a line, not a circle, which would imply returning to the same place. A spiral, always moving forward, always opening to new levels, but returning to the same fundamental practice of field coherence and field contact at each level. The practice does not become unnecessary as you advance. It becomes more natural, more immediate, more effortless, until the coherent state is not something you do, but something you are. Until the contact with the field is not a practice you engage in, but the ground of your existence. This is the destination that the gate opens toward, not a final state of perfection or completion, but a way of being in which the quantum field is not a concept you understand, but a reality you inhabit, in which the possibilities of the field are not something you hope to access, but something you are constantly, naturally, effortlessly in resonance with, in which the crossing from one level to the next is not a dramatic event, but a natural, ongoing, continuous process of evolution. This is what the book is pointing toward. This is the secret revealed. This is the gate. And there is something important to say about the community of people who are crossing. Because the gate is not only an individual experience. The quantum field is non-local. It is not constrained by space or time. The entanglement that quantum mechanics describes, the phenomenon by which two quantum systems that have interacted remain correlated across any distance, so that a change in one is immediately reflected in the other. This is not just a laboratory curiosity. It is a description of the fundamental connectedness of all things that have interacted, which, at the quantum level, means all things. When one consciousness crosses a threshold, it changes the field. not dramatically, not in a way that is easily measured by the instruments of ordinary physics, but in a way that is real. The frequency shift of one consciousness resonates through the field and makes the crossing slightly easier for every other consciousness that is approaching the same threshold. This is the quantum mechanics of collective evolution. This is why the people who have crossed the gate before you are not simply inspirations. They are, in a literal sense, part of the reason the gate is easier to cross now than it was before. And you, having crossed, or having moved significantly closer to crossing through this transmission, are now part of the same dynamic. Your frequency shift resonates through the field. The people who are approaching this gate will find it slightly more accessible because you have crossed. The collective frequency rises with each individual crossing. The field becomes more coherent, more accessible, more responsive as more consciousnesses engage with it at the higher frequency. This is not mysticism. This is the quantum mechanics of a non-local field in which all conscious systems are, in some fundamental sense, entangled, in which the evolution of one is the evolution of all, in which the crossing of each individual gate contributes to the opening of the collective gate. The community of people who are engaging with this material, who are approaching these thresholds, crossing these gates, working with these practices, is not just a community of like-minded individuals sharing a common interest. It is a resonant field, a collective coherence that amplifies the individual crossings and makes the collective evolution possible. If you feel the pull of this community, if something in you recognizes the importance of not crossing alone, of crossing in the company of others who are making the same journey, of having a context in which the crossing is witnessed and supported and celebrated, then follow that pull. The field is not pointing you toward isolation. The field is pointing you toward connection, toward the community of consciousness that is right now in the process of collectively crossing the gate. If this transmission found you at the right moment, if you are standing at your own threshold right now, or if you know someone who is, return to this in a moment of stillness. Let it meet you again from the other side of whatever has shifted, and share it with someone who is at their own crossing point. The act of sharing is not incidental. When you offer this to another person who is approaching a gate, you are building a bridge for them to cross, and in doing so, you strengthen the resonant field for both of you. Shared threshold recognition is itself a frequency amplifier. The entanglement is real. Share what you have received here, not to convince anyone, not to recruit anyone, but because sharing is itself a frequency. The act of articulating what you have understood, of putting into words what you have experienced, of offering to another person the transmission you have received. This is itself a practice of field coherence. This is itself a crossing. The comments below this transmission are a field. The people who gather there are a resonant community. what you bring to that field, what you share of your own crossing, your own recognition, your own arrival on the other side, contributes to the coherence of the whole. And the coherence of the whole makes the individual crossings more possible, more stable, more real. Leave something real, not a performance, not a demonstration of how much you understand. Something real, something true, something that reflects the actual quality of your experience of this transmission, of this crossing, of this arrival. The field receives it, the community receives it, and the collective frequency rises. Now, let's integrate what we have covered, because integration is the final step of the crossing. The crossing is not complete until the new state has been integrated into the actual texture of your life, until the understanding has become the way you see, until the frequency has become the baseline, until the other side of the gate is not a special destination, but your ordinary home. The quantum field is not a concept. It is the ground of reality. It is the substrate from which all things arise. It is the vast, alive, responsive potential that underlies everything you can see and touch and measure and experience. And it responds, not to your wishes, not to your thoughts, not to your intentions as stated verbally, but to the actual frequency of your consciousness, to what you actually are, in the most fundamental sense, beneath the surface of your thinking and doing and saying. The crossing that this transmission has guided you through is the crossing from a consciousness that understands this intellectually to a consciousness that knows it somatically. From a consciousness that believes the quantum field is connected to awareness, to a consciousness that is the quantum field being aware. From a consciousness that is trying to access the field to a consciousness that has recognized itself as an expression of the field. This recognition is the gate. This recognition is the secret. This recognition is what the book reveals, and it is not a recognition that can be fully conveyed in words. Because words are a surface tool, a tool of the already collapsed world of objects and event and narratives. The recognition is deeper than words. It is in the body. It is in the nervous system. It is in the actual felt quality of being alive. But words can point toward it. Practices can support it. Transmissions like this one can create the conditions in which it becomes possible. And the crossing, once it happens, once the recognition is real, once the frequency shift is actual, is irreversible. The gate closes behind you. The old state has collapsed. The new state is your reality. There is no going back from here, and there is nothing to go back to. Because the version of you that was on the other side of the gate, the version that was standing at the threshold, uncertain and hesitant and not yet sure what was on the other side, that version has crossed, has been transformed by the crossing. has become the version that is now standing in the new territory, looking back at the gate with the clear, calm certainty of someone who has arrived.